Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. So I'm Nikki West, and I'm the Director of Client and Agency Services at Newsworks, which is the marketing body for the UK national news publishing industry. And our mission at Newsworks is really to encourage advertisers and media agencies to think positively about news brands with the aim of increasing advertising investment into the industry to sustain quality journalism into the future. So in the next 30 minutes, we are going to focus on how trusted journalism offers a compelling, effective, and importantly, brand safe advertising opportunity for advertisers. And we'll also touch on some insight from a new hot off the press One Poll survey, which shines a light on how consumers feel about ad blocking and journalism. So we're going to start with a bit of context around why agencies and advertisers should back and not block trusted news publishing environments before I hand over to Emma Cranston, who is Client Services Director at Ozone, who will lead a discussion with an esteemed panel of industry experts around some of the key challenges and opportunities. Now, I hope you'll all agree that trusted journalism is more important than ever before. In a world blighted by fake news, the rejection of facts, and the spread of harmful content, trusted journalism really does matter. And over the past 6 months, there's been much more talk across the industry about the importance and benefits of trusted environments that are professionally curated, crafted, and regulated, whether that's TV, radio, or news brands. And only last week, some of you may have seen that the News Alliance launched, and this is a cross-industry coalition of media businesses that support and promote trusted news and journalism to advertisers against a backdrop of misinformation and fake news, also with the aim of encouraging increased advertising investment into the industry. And so it does feel like momentum is starting to build. And encouragingly, recently at Newsworks, we've seen a noticeable increase in people from agencies downloading and reading our Fact Not Fake report and also our trust study. In the first of these reports, 74% of people said that they turned to newspaper websites or apps to verify stories that they read on social media. And this increases to 78% when we're looking at 16 to 34-year-olds, which is interesting. And while the trust study, marketing effectiveness guru Peter Field found that the link between trust in news brands and advertiser profit growth has risen sharply over the past decade. And interestingly, that growth has been strongest since 2016, around the time that trust issues began to explode. So, think Trump, Brexit, Cambridge Analytica, and the emergence of the fake news era. However, the irony is that in the name of brand safety, too many advertisers continue to unwittingly block trusted news brands from their plans at a time when investment in the news industry is most needed. And when we try to establish the scale of the challenge in terms of ad blocking, it's interesting to look at some of the recent findings from Mantis, which is a leading brand safety and contextual product built by news publisher Reach plc. So they recently released some data showing that advertisers relying on outdated keyword block lists missed out on nearly half of all Super Bowl related content. And this is because keywords such as victims, injuries, wounds, and incidents were frequently being used in standard agency block lists. And while these terms might indicate sensitive content in some contexts, in sports coverage, they're often used to describe standard gameplay. So approaching ad blocking in a way that fails to consider the context resulted in advertisers being prevented from reaching highly engaged and relevant audiences around one of the biggest sporting events of the year. A more recent analysis from Mantis has shown that advertisers inadvertently blocked 56% of Oscars-related content, again due to overzealous keyword block lists, despite most of the content being brand safe. And I think what this shows us is that, it highlights the stark challenges that the news industry is facing because of blunt ad blocking tools. Advertisers are missing out on the opportunity of getting their brand in front of millions of engaged eyeballs in culturally relevant content. And at the same time, publishers are missing out on the ability to monetize some of their most valuable content. However, there's a whole host of evidence which demonstrates that professionally created journalism, crafted journalism, is a safe environment for brands, and that advertising within news is a really positive thing for advertisers. So in the interest of time, I'm going to share 4 key proof points with you now. So first up is the fact that the UK news publishing industry is built on accountability and fact-checking. The majority of news and magazine publishers adhere to the Editor's Code of Practice, which is run by IPSO, which is the Independent Press Standards Organisation, which is the UK's main press regulator, with a remit to balance freedom of expression whilst protecting the rights of individuals. And in addition to this, news brands also have their own internal editorial codes of conduct, which dictate ethical practices such as ensuring accuracy through rigorous fact-checking, objectivity, fairness and sensitivity when covering stories which journalists are expected to follow. The second proof point is that neuroscience analysis indicates that placing advertising within a hard news environment actually has no negative impact on advertising responses. In fact, it actually delivers an incremental benefit to advertisers. So we know from the research that average dwell time of an ad is 1.4 times higher in a hard news environment compared with a soft news environment, which can only be a good thing for advertisers. However, because our brains are more actively engaged with hard news, within hard news, when you're reading hard news, advertising messages placed within a hard news context are more likely to be remembered. And this is really important because message retention is closely linked to purchase intent. So this is great news for advertisers, all the brands appearing in and around hard news. And then building on this, turning to the third proof point, a recent research study by Harris X and Stagwell as part of their Future of News initiative showed unequivocally that there's no discernible difference in terms of brand reputation scores for ads that are placed next to what is considered brand unsafe news stories. So anything that sits within war, politics and crime, for example, compared with ads next to brand safe stories. So, stories within business, entertainment and sports. Once again, highlighting that there is no negative impact on how people perceive brands after seeing an ad in a hard news environment. And hopefully we're going to hear more about this from Jack Miles from Harris X during the panel shortly. And then finally, proof point 4, recent research from Teeds and Lumen called The Power of Traditional News shows that whilst reading hard news articles such as politics, foreign policy and climate does invoke a strong emotional response amongst readers, like, sadness and anxiousness, that doesn't translate into negative impact for brands. On the contrary, these strong emotional responses piques reader interest, which actually has a significant benefit for brands. And the research showed a clear correlation between attention and brand outcomes when ads were viewed alongside traditional news content, including a 20% increase in ad attention, which drove a 77% uplift in brand outcomes. So once again, highlighting the benefit for advertisers who advertise within trusted quality news environments. And so it's not surprising to see that the use of news brand in a campaign is associated with strong improvements across a number of key business metrics, including things like market share, pricing power increase, so price elasticity and profit growth, according to an analysis of the IPA data bank by Peter Field. So a really strong performance, which can only be explained by the increase in brand trust and brand quality effects that come with advertising in news brands. But what do the general public think about all of this? Well, hot off the press today, a new OnePoll survey highlights that 8 in 10 of those surveyed were previously unaware that advertisers were using keyword block lists to prevent ads appearing against news stories. However, having learnt about ad blocking, 7 in 10 agree that advertisers should be investing more of their advertising budget into news brands and quality journalism instead of blocking it. As a result of ad blocking practices, people believe that advertisers are missing out on being featured next to the most read news of the day, being part of the day's conversation, and being part of news that readers will remember. But more importantly, half of Brits said seeing an ad next to a hard-hitting news story would not change the way that they feel about the brand or advertiser compared to seeing it next to any other news story. And that's a finding that's, obviously corroborated by the Stagwell Future of News research. So lots and lots of food for thought there. I'm going to hand over to Emma, who's Client Services Director at Ozone now, to lead a panel discussion on some of the key things and key themes that we've brought up today around the power of trusted news environments and ad blocking.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That's an overwhelming amount of research which really proves news brands' effectiveness from various different sources. Now, before we go into the questions, let me introduce you to the panelists. We have Karen Eccles, Chief Commercial Officer of The Telegraph, Adam Foley, the CEO of Bountiful Cow, and Jack Miles, Senior Director of Harris X. Now, if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to those at the end. So let's start with the thing that's probably most important to advertisers, effectiveness. So Adam, what's your take on effectiveness of news brands as part of the media mix, and how are you measuring this?
Well, I think, as Nikki said, there's already plenty of research into the effectiveness of news brands that Newsworks have been doing for years and years. I'm a huge fan of the work they've done with Peter Field over the last 9-10 years, and the Hard News project that Nikki alluded to earlier on. So I kind of feel like I'm not sure how much more evidence there needs to be, or why not enough people are listening. And in my career and in my kind of recent career at Bountiful Cow, we've seen news brands deliver both short and long-term metrics for brands across all the clients we use them for, showing up in all the usual ways, driving footfall, bookings, consideration, brand growth. But it's not rocket science, because if you put your brand in front of millions of people in a quality environment that people care about, then it's going to get noticed and it's going to get remembered and it's going to get acted upon, because news brands have a really unique combination. And it's something we don't talk about enough, I think, because you've got tens of millions of people in this country going to a news brand every single day. And outside of major sporting events, there's no TV show that delivers anything close to that. So it's one of the last real broadcast channels. And I think when you add the news brands like the Telegraph and the Guardian that prioritise a great reader experience, where they have like really beautiful ads and not very many on the page, of course it's a great advertising environment. Why would it not be?
Absolutely. So we know it works. However, as we heard from Nikki earlier, news brands are really struggling to monetize their digital inventory because of the overzealous application of brand safety and ad blocking. Karen, can you describe what the issues that publishers are facing specifically around this area?
Yeah, absolutely. And hi, everyone. So I think there are three main issues that we face. The first is a misunderstanding about what news is. So news generally isn't necessarily unsafe. It's highly engaging and emotive and sort of all the things that we know makes advertising work. So it's really important that there is an ability to distinguish between hard breaking news and the rolling news agenda. And news brands tend to find that that's all sort of heaped into one. Well, actually, hard breaking news is generally, ads are blocked on there anyway by news brands, because we govern that and our own, sort of readers, sort of brand safe experience very carefully. We have blockers set up in order to do that, but you find that sort of general news is blocked instead, which isn't unsafe. Secondly, and something I'll pick up on a little bit in more detail, which is that keyword blocking is just not fit for purpose, but is still used. Blanket blocks are applied to news brands. And then the third sort of challenge that we're facing really is the impact. So first of all, to journalism and society, as a whole, if advertising isn't there to back and to help to fund journalism, not all brands are subscriber first, as the Telegraph, all Times, for example, are, but we very much rely on sort of advertising as well as our sub strategies. So the reduction of investment to news brands hits really hard, and that's something we should all care about, not just news brands. And the second part of that is the impact for advertisers, what they're missing out on, because news environments, when they're brand safe, are actually the most highly effective advertising environments you can target within. But just a quick point on the keyword blocking, I asked our ad ops team to sort of give me some details on recent blanket block lists that they've received. And we're lucky in a way because we have enough resource to take time to go through block lists and to challenge them with advertisers. But they gave me this example of one received recently from a major international airline. So the block list received had 34,000 words across 22 languages. 3,000 of those words were in English. And so many of those words had multiple meanings. So, for example, accident was blocked, including articles like how to avoid a Christmas accident when putting up decorations. Crash is blocked. So articles like the Ashes was a car crash, England must ditch certain players, I took a crash course in basic DIY, all blocked. And heroin, you're addicted to your phone, it's a bit like heroin. And injured, there's a snobbery about e-bikes, but they've helped injured riders like me get back in the saddle. So blanket block lists really are, sort of impeding publishers from sufficiently monetizing our inventory, but also they're preventing a huge amount of quality inventory being available to advertisers who would actually see really effective results from it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Karen. What's the agency view on this, Adam? What concerns do you face with your clients investing their advertising budgets into news brands?
I don't have any concerns about my clients investing their advertising budgets into news brands whatsoever. In my previous job, I was at The Guardian. I wanted to kick all the brand safety verification software off the platform. It's not even just the blocking, but the actual scripts of it slow down pages as well. That creates a problem for the product side of the business. To be really clear, I think brand safety on quality news sites is poorly thought out, totally unnecessary, and utterly ruinous. When I was at The Guardian, I used to hear agency people kind of calling the print team, hustling for their ads to run as far forward in the paper as possible, because everyone knows main news is where you get the most attention and eyeballs. And then you have the digital team under pressure for ads to run anywhere but main news. It was this kind of really weird dichotomy. And the reason that there's any need for brand safety technology is this. The metrics for success in traditional online IAB format advertising so incredibly low that to make a 0.9% click-through rate add up to anything useful, you've got to buy millions upon millions of impressions. And the only way to satisfy that is to splurge it all over the internet and have no idea exactly where your ads are running. So brand safety technology protects advertisers from the worst of the internet, but as Karen's pointed out, it penalizes the best of the internet, which is news brands. There is nothing wrong with running advertising against news. There's nothing wrong with running advertising against articles about war or about sex or about racism or whatever else is being blocked. The example that always gets thrown around is what if BA, I don't know what the airline was that Karen was talking about, but for example, if they had an ad appear next to an article about a plane crash, well, that really rarely happens. And the reason is because news brands have human editors. And quite apart from not wanting to upset their advertising customers, the last thing they need is their readers complaining. And when something like that does happen, there is invariably a deluge of complaints, which everyone could do without. An advertisement running next to an article about the Ukraine war is not an endorsement of the Ukraine war. An anti-racist article blocked from running ads because it contains the word racism is a wasted opportunity. So to answer the question, I've got no concerns whatsoever about brands using quality news, but I have a massive amount of concern about the impact on our society and the availability of effective vehicles for brand advertising if they don't. I've got great concern about the idea of brand suitability, that brands should only advertise with news brands whose values they happen to agree with. I believe strongly that we should all support news brands from across the political spectrum to boost and support media neutrality and the prolonging of effective channels for advertisers.
Absolutely. And I think everything that you've just said is echoed in the research, the Future of News research that Stagwell and Harris X did. Jack, can you give us a little bit more detail on like why Stagwell commissioned this piece of research and some of the key findings, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. So we've actually done kind of two pieces of research within the Future of News initiative so far, but the underlying motivation for both has been the same. It kind of echoes what everyone else has said. We believe that quality news, which informs people about society's most important issues, is critical to democracy. But we also recognise that it's currently underfunded because brands are reducing their spend on news advertising. And as a result of that, the funding behind newsrooms is declining, misinformation is on the rise, and democracy, as a result of that, is suffering. So the hope of the Future of News initiative is that we can show the value of news media to advertisers through our research, and hopefully encourage people within marketing and advertising to invest more in news media, which in turn will mean we can better fund high quality journalism and give people access to quality information. That the first piece of research that we did to kind of support that motivation showed that it was safe for brands to advertise in the news, regardless of whether their advert was placed alongside a so-called safe or unsafe story. And we demonstrated that by showing that there's no detrimental impact to kind of key brand measures like appeal and purchase intent if their advert is displayed next to a story about crime or the Middle East. And we did that in the UK and the US, testing adverts from 6 or 7 different sectors. So it's a really robust piece of work, but also within that piece of work, and I think this builds on something that Adam mentioned, we showed that in the UK, there's a group of people we'd refer to as news junkies, people who follow the news very closely. Now that accounts for a quarter quarter of the UK population. And those news junkies have higher incomes and higher levels of disposable incomes in comparison to the general population. So why wouldn't advertisers want to engage with that audience? The second piece of research which we've done measured how global business leaders viewed news media, the benefits they saw in it, and they were massively positive towards it. In every single country in the study, business leaders said that they were very positive towards the news media. They saw it as a good way to engage with stakeholders, and as a result of that, really good investment for them.
And since the launch, do you know if there's been any meaningful shift with regards to ad investment into news brands?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at the kind of ad spend data that's available from WARC, you can't see a nice upward curve emerging yet. But I think the reality is behaviour change takes time, and I mean, our first piece of research was done kind of less than a year ago. But I do think the most important thing is that the bank of evidence to drive that behaviour change is there, and the interest in the research and the evidence is also present. We've had over 2,000 people attend various Future of News events. The research has been presented at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and it's had great exposure, not just the marketing press, but also the mainstream press. So I think the ingredients for that change are there, Emma. I just think we need to keep pushing out the message and wait a little bit.
Absolutely. To see, it does take time to see these big changes. We need patience, but we need action and momentum. So momentum of different proof points to prove its effectiveness. And another example of this is actually Bountiful Cow and Ozone are conducting a test to understand the impact of advertising within news environments. And what was the objective of the test? And can you tell us anything about the initial findings?
Yeah, sure. So I've always wanted to work at an agency which has got a really clear, simple proposition that everyone understands. And at Bountiful Cow, ours is called relative advantage, and it's really simple. Basically, we build disproportionate advantage for brands by looking for spaces where our competitors aren't. So we're looking for spaces where our audience are, that we think will be effective, and where the competition aren't. And sadly, but in some of the categories we work in, the space where our competitors are not includes news brands, and that's mainly due to brand safety technology. So we created a tool called Relative Advantage Unblocked, where we buy only the inventory that's been classed as unsafe by brand safety tech. So we're buying unsafe inventory across news brands in the Ozone project. So what that means is all of our content runs on all the best articles, which are free from other advertisers. So all the stuff about war, crashing out the ashes, sport, generally sex, whatever it might be. And the objective of the test, I suppose, was to sort of be a bit mischievous to make a point, but mainly because we knew we would get the best of the best content and get a disproportionate share of voice, which we know is a proven driver of success in advertising. So I guess what we're saying with this project is that we back the editors to decide where advertising appears, not poorly performing technology that's got no business being there in the first place. And we're going to unveil the results of the test on the 1st of May at an event at the Everyman. Can't remember which one, but an Everyman. And I guess without giving too much away, the short version is kind of exactly the same as what Jack was already saying, which is not only did the metrics not go down when brands appeared in this awful, unsafe content, but funnily enough, they went up because of course they did.
Can't wait to see the full results on that test. Thank you, Adam. Karen, what are the news publishing industry doing to reduce some of the barriers around investing in news brands?
Well, I can speak for the Telegraph, but I think, as everyone's alluding to, we can only work to the extent of our resources, and really we're all doing everything we can. I think the onus is on clients and agencies to back us and to sort of understand that there's a different approach for quality news compared to the long tail of the web. But a couple of examples of what we're doing, I suppose the first is around the hygiene factors. And I think we've referenced this, the fact that there's editorial oversight, that blockers are in place. So if there really is a reason why an ad shouldn't run on a piece of editorial, it won't. And you very rarely see something, really inappropriate in advertising terms on a sort of quality news story appearing where it shouldn't, because there are so many measures in place on our side to ensure that it doesn't. But on the other side, to pick up on Adam's and yours point about proving the effectiveness, the Telegraph invested. We were the first news brand to put our money where our mouths are on attention metrics about 6 or 7 years ago. and showing that quality environments do drive better results, and why there's a difference in yield in quality sort of publishing and news environments versus the web long tail. But post-pandemic, we noticed that our sell-through rates in news had reduced, and we were very highly sold through on the rest of our channels. So we needed to do something about it. So we took our attention metrics initiative, which is called Metrics That Matter, and we ran a sort of evolution of that called Stories That Matter. And this has been in market for, must be sort of 3-4 years now. We would have launched it in 2021, I think. And we offered advertisers a matched investment if they would release their blocks in safe news. So basically, if they would entrust this to us, and allow their campaign to run across just, the best inventory for them and allow us to optimize. And the impact of that was we saw a 60% uplift in their metrics versus our own benchmarks across other lifestyle inventory, which, as you'd imagine, is in quality, sort of publishing already higher than you'd see across the rest of so the media plan. So that proof is there. I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of the Bountiful Cow and Ozone study, because the majority of the inventory, for example, that would go from the Telegraph into Ozone is that absolutely brand safe, high quality news. And we would love to see a way that programmatic partners sort of tap into that via Ozone, as well as in direct conversations with us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. And do you think there's a difference between brand safety and brand suitability? And do agencies and clients need to apply both?
In short, no. I think I think brand safety, they should lift the blanket block lists with news brands and entrust that to us. You can have a conversation with ad ops teams with sort of, any of the quality news or with Ozone. And in terms of brand suitability, I think that should be flipped towards positive contextual targeting. Really what's important is the end effectiveness, and just have we put in place hygiene factors to ensure that that ad is running in the right place. Otherwise, we will always optimize towards the most effective audience targeting and contextual targeting. So whilst I understand why it may be necessary for the long tail of sort of a digital plan, with quality news it's just not necessary, and it's preventing campaigns from being as effective as they could be.
Yeah, agreed. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to skip to one of my last questions before we go to the Q&A. What's your thinking of the latest rollbacks of the content moderation services on social platforms, and what could this mean for advertisers, and what should it mean? I'll open that to the panel. Who would like to take that one?
I'm going to suggest Adam. Go on, Adam.
Oh, Adam, okay.
Okay, yeah. So I don't know, I wasn't as horrified by this as a lot of people have been, mainly because I think that social platforms have always been absolutely useless at content moderation. And I'm not sure taking a human element out of it makes any difference. We've seen from the Twitter files reduced that actually human moderation has actually increased kind of bias, like the kind of human algorithm, as you'd expect. Everyone's got a kind of sense of editorial bias, and that's resulted in kind of censorship on both sides of the debate. So why would you entrust your advertising budget to a forum which doesn't really has never had quality content moderation, while penalising an environment that's kind of grown up for 200 years with excellent content moderation in the form of editors?
Nicely put. I'm just going to go to the Q&A now, and we've got one from Brian from Ozone. He says, probably one for Adam, but we've seen so much evidence of news brands are inherently safe. What is the one message you would take to skeptical advertisers that would most likely to change their mind on this topic, and what would it be?
I guess you need to sell a bit of a dream rather than, the last thing the industry needs to do is kind of be coming out with a begging bowl and saying, you need to support advertising. But we all know it's important for democracy, but you need to kind of sell an important role for advertisers as well. And I think it's this, is what about a goal of knowing every single site your ads have run on? So we've gone back over the last sort of 10, 15 years to a point where, you advertised everywhere, and no one could tell you exactly where your adverts are. Now, 25 years ago, when I started in media, you'd have been fired for that. But if we kind of remove ourselves from this idea that we've got to satisfy poorly performing metrics and figure out exactly what counts, not the end environments, or maybe even create new formats, the goal of knowing every single ad your site run on is achievable. You can just do that. We could turn off brand safety and only spend with quality platforms and publishers who are reaching millions of people. And news brands will naturally fall into that. So the goal would be you'd have much more control over where your ads run and be completely confident they're running in great places.
Thank you. I'm very conscious of time. Any other questions that haven't been answered, we'll reply back directly to you. I just want to thank the panel. Thank you so much for your time, Adam and Karen and Jack. Thank you. Just to close the panel, though, just to circle back to what Nikki said earlier about the News Alliance, they've identified 4 key actions for advertising agency partners to support. And these are champion trusted journalism, which is critical to advertising ecosystem and society as a whole. Actively invest in news environments. All the evidence shows that it works. Reconsider what brand safety means, especially in the context of news. Review advertising block lists and ensure news is not being unintentionally penalised. We need action here. If we don't have action, nothing's going to happen, and we're living in a world of fake news, and nobody wants that. It's the benefit of the advertisers and society. So let's support it, everybody. Right. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll speak to you soon.